So, Matt, the one thing Keir Starmer didn't have to worry about during this election was the Corbynites.
Until now. So we thought that the Corbynite purge, or the quelling of Corbynism and the dealing with anti-Semitism, was all phase one of the Starmer leadership. And the centre of the attention, and I have to say, I think justifiably, is Dian Abbott, MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington since 1987, who is very, very displeased with how she's being treated. And I think if producer Matt could give us a blast of what she said on Wednesday at a meeting outside Hackney Town Hall.
I joined the Labour Party as a young woman nearly 50 years ago. I was shocked to learn yesterday that I am going to be banned from running for the Labour Party.
Reacting to reports claiming Labour will not let her stand here to be an MP again, she warned,
by any means possible, I will be the candidate for Hackney North.
What's your theory? Cock-up or part of a plan?
There's a vindictiveness beneath all this. I don't think that this particular series of events was in any way a plan. So it counts as cock-up, but I don't think it can be just dismissed as cock-up. I think there's a lot to it, and none of it flattering to Starmer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're recording this on Thursday, and you know, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, was the main interviewee at 8:10, and he was able, as a consequence of this, to slip in the line, if Keir Starmer can't deal with Dian Abbott, how can he deal with Vladimir Putin?
Yeah,
which is a cheap line,
yeah.
But, you know, that's a campaign.
Yes.
So I guess we should we do a quick rewind how this happened, you know, very briefly. So April last year, Dian Abbott, very much a figure of the left, very much associated with Jeremy Corbyn, writes a letter to the Observer comparing the discrimination suffered by Jewish people and the travellers community to the taunting of redheads. It's not full racism, and this is a long-standing row that not treating Jewish people as an ethnicity.
Didn't she say that Jewish people and travellers don't experience racism in the same way black people do?
She did, and to be honest with you, I think that what happened then was that she accepted that the implication of her letter was that Jewish people are not an ethnicity, and therefore that was not good, and she apologised. It then became inevitably a disciplinary matter. She was suspended, the whip taken away, and and very recently we were being told that it was still live and kicking. Then, so as recently as Friday, May the 24th, a week ago today, Keir Starmer was saying to Nick Ferrara in LBC, well, look, Diane is going through a process, Nick. So, because, in relation to the investigation of an issue relating to her that's not finally resolved. And then on this Tuesday, Victoria Derbyshire of BBC Newsnight revealed that it had been resolved.
In December.
And
6 months ago.
6 months ago. And that Dian Abbott, had gone on an online anti-Semitism awareness course. So there was then this implication that she'd got the whip back.
Yeah.
But then the Times reported that she was going to be barred from standing as Labour candidate in Hackney North and Stoke Newington, which made no sense at all.
But then the inference wasn't it, that perhaps there was a scenario where they wanted to give her the dignity of a graceful exit?
Exactly, which was why she was so cross about the Times story, because what they had basically, whoever had briefed the Times was saying she was being given the whip back, but she wasn't going to stand in the election.
And the assumption is that whoever was doing that briefing was within the Labour Party machine.
I suppose. I mean, I've absolutely...
Because I've heard counter tales where perhaps it was Diane Abbott who was doing briefings.
Well, I don't... Who knows? I just don't know. Then yesterday, we'll try not to get too stuck in the weeds, Starmer is asked to confirm whether she's in fact been barred as a Labour candidate, and he says, no, that's not true. No decision has been taken to bar Dian Abbott. Abbott then texts a BBC reporter saying, yes, she has been barred. So, which brings us up to more or less today, which is that on Wednesday, she made this statement, which I read, I don't know how you read it, Matt, but I read is that even if she's not the Labour candidate, she will stand in Hackney, where she has a 33,000
70%.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I think she'll win.
Yeah. Where are your sympathies?
Well, my ideological sympathies are very far from hers, but I think that there are some much bigger points at stake here, which is my sympathies are with her, because it's necessary for a new leader of a party coming in after the worst defeat since 1935 to make pretty ruthlessly clear that there is going to be a change, okay? And particularly in light of the anti-Semitism report that came from the Equality and Human Rights Commission in 2020, Starmer had to take some pretty rough and ruthless decisions in 2020. But that was advertised as phase one. You know, he's kicked Jeremy Corbyn off to the side. Corbyn is now standing as an independent in his constituency. But the purge, if you want to call it that, was meant to be phase one. You know, Keir Starmer, and bringing the Labour Party back to the centre. We're going to be a moderate, calm, stable, not anti-Semitic party. That was meant to be kind of phase one. Well, we find ourselves, because of the way the Dian Abbott case has been mishandled, right back at the beginning. You know, it's like snakes and ladders. We've gone down to go. Yeah. And I think there's a difference between strong leadership of a party and accepting there are tough steps you have to take when you take over a battered, ruined party, and vindictiveness. And I have to say that the way in which her Diane Abbott's investigation has been delayed and the announcement of its results have been delayed, I find very hard to explain just as a mix-up, because she's a very prominent figure.
So, I mean, my take on it, I completely agree with the sentiment you've just expressed. And Dian Abbott in this story is two different things. And this is where I think the Labour Party has found itself falling over and landing on its face. Firstly, she is the close ally of Jeremy Corbyn and indelibly linked with Corbynism and, you know, the putative Home Secretary who was clearly not Home Secretary material, you know, in the way she expressed herself in interviews and stuff. So she's that. And that's where Keir Starmer's got a problem with her. But she is also the first black woman MP that the United Kingdom has ever elected to the House of Commons. And that, in my view, trumps all of that. Now that Starmer has killed Corbynism, why would you worry about shooting all of the other Corbynites? You've got Jeremy Corbyn out of the party. Yes. That job is done. You've proven your tough credentials in that regard. But Diane Abbott is an absolute trailblazer. And if you look at how other nations treat first black women legislators, take a look at Shirley Chisholm, right, who I'll be honest, I'd never heard of prior to today. But she's the first black woman elected to Congress
right.
in the States.
I see, right.
Shirley Chisholm is lionized. Right. American Presidential Medal of Honor, libraries named after her, treated as an absolute trailblazer and lauded, you know, literally on pedestals throughout the country. Diane Abbott has suffered nothing but outrageous abuse from hardcore racists
industrial scale abuse.
Industrial scale abuse. And if you go back, and I'd commend anybody to go back and look at her maiden speech in, you know, talking nearly 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. You see there an absolutely strong, powerful warrior, you know, somebody who this country should be saying, my God, if only we had 1 million more Diane Abbotts, we would be in a much better place. Instead, she's treated as an embarrassment, a national embarrassment by her own party.
So he looks, I think today, two things he can't afford to be. Three, actually. He looks petty.
Yeah.
He looks vindictive. He looks as if the party machinery has, in his gang, his entourage, have enjoyed stringing her out in this way. And also, let's not forget, and this comes out very clearly in Tom Baldwin's books, Tom Baldwin, whom we had on the pod to talk about his biography a few weeks ago. He Keir Starmer defines himself, he says, by natural justice and the rule of law, rules. He was the lawyer who made his name trotting the world, defending human rights. Now, natural justice applies in all sorts of arenas, and one of them is the procedural way in which you treat the members of your organisation, in this case, the Labour Parliamentary Party. And she's clearly been treated extremely badly. But what you also see here is that what happened in the Corbyn era it wasn't just that they were, so to speak, too left-wing. They were also too factional.
Yes.
And there was a sort of, the party was looking inward, and it was factionally introspective. And one of Starmer's big lines was, we've got to stop the party looking inward and make it a party of the nation looking outward. And that, here to that. But this looks like exactly what he hated in Corbyn, which is factional introspection, backbiting. It is noticeable that people who are in the Starmer, Rachel Reeves gang, like Josh Simons and Luke Akehurst and Heather Iqbal, have been parachuted into very nice seats, while, Dian Abbott is being treated like a petty criminal. And Labour people being sent out on broadcast at the moment are desperately to say, oh, this is a process issue.
Yeah, bullshit. Yeah.
It's not a process issue. I mean, Dian Abbott is, we should not, lest we forget, she was on Andrew Neil's television show for many years with Michael Portillo, and so she is known to a lot of people who don't follow politics, and also for the reasons you cited, Matt. That she's a trailblazer. She's a iconic figure. Whatever you think about her position on the ideological spectrum, you can't take any of that away from her. So here's my sort of verdict on the last few days is, and we talked about this last week, Starmer and Rachel Reeves have obviously decided they're going to be quite policy light, to the point where when Jeremy Hunt announced that there were going to be no VAT rises under the Conservatives if they won this general election, you couldn't hit it for dust before Labour announced, and we won't do it too. We're not going to raise income tax. We're not going to raise the national insurance. We're not going to raise VAT. Right? We're not going to do the green pledges until later in the Parliament. The policy is draining out the plug hole. Now, there's an argument about whether that's the right strategy or not. But what it does do is, if you don't have a policy suite to make your main offer, it's going to draw attention to you as a personality, your character, what you're doing. And so the airwaves and the podcasts and the newsletters and everything else is now filling with verdicts upon how Keir Starmer has handled the Dian Abbott saga. And if you're new to the whole thing, and a lot of people won't know anything about Starmer, because they don't follow politics.
Wes Streeting's out today with Starmer, meant to be making the whole new waves of health, optimism and that, but no one's talking about it. That's the only mention they'll get.
Of course not. And, and behind the scenes, a lot of Labour people, not from Dian Abbott's wing, are very edgy about this, because Starmer, the big problem is, everyone says in every focus group ever held on him, what does he stand for? Well, for a lot of people, this will have been the first time, so to speak, they've switched on and asked the question out loud, and what they will have seen is a white knight, literally, a Sir Keir, apparently treating a iconic woman of colour and politician very badly indeed, and without due respect. Now, I'm not accusing Starmer of being a sort of lifelong racist or anything near that. So that would be ridiculous. But if you're in the middle of a campaign, you can't afford to make mistakes like this.
No. And also, it does reflect badly on us all. I think when you think back at how all of us have, it's difficult to phrase this correctly, but I hope people understand what I mean when I stumble around this. But we've all tolerated to a degree the abuse that Dian Abbott receives, because we haven't spent all day just religiously putting it to the sword. It's like it's become accepted that she gets a load of abuse. It'll be the second thing anyone tells you about.
Yes, it's become horribly normalised,
and it does make you wonder when you compare to the States in particular.
Yes.
How there's a positive discrimination there when it comes to noting and celebrating excellence in the black community, because it's recognition of what's gone before, and there's a correction being made. And obviously neither of us are black, so it's hard, and neither of us would dream of speaking for the black community. But I would say, if I was black, I'd be looking at what happened to Diane Abbott, and I'd be wondering what's the distinctive factor here that has made her being treated so badly, because her treatment is markedly different to others, and the only distinctive factor is that she's black, she's a woman, and she's all right. She's been a troublemaker for Starmer, but being a troublemaker in the Labour Party shouldn't be a sackable offence.
And also, look, the troublemaking era of Diane Abbott's career was underlined over. It has now been very, very publicly reignited. And so the Labour lead in the polls it seems robust at the moment. So, I'm not saying this is a disaster for Labour's prospects of gaining a majority. What I am saying, though, is rather more on looking on the other side of an election, which is that as a sort of first glance at how Prime Minister Keir Starmer will handle internal party matters, this is not a very edifying sight.
Alistair was on, our editor at large, Alistair Campbell, talking about this and saying, Corbyn and Diane Abbott and all the rest of them voted against their government countless times, lost count.
Yes.
But they never even dreamed of kicking them out.
No.
It just didn't even come up.
The comparison, the contrast that immediately came to mind was, when Ken Livingstone stood as London mayor, as an independent, it was one of the biggest embarrassments for Blair.
Yeah.
Defeating the official Labour candidate, Frank Dobson. It was early doors for Blair, so he was meant always to succeed, and he was really humiliated by this. What did he do? He called Livingstone in.
Yeah, of course.
And said, right, you're the mayor, I'm the Prime Minister, we got to do business. And in short order, Ken became the Labour candidate and got another term. So I'm not saying it's not an exact analogy, but what that shows is that Blair, who's a similar moderate centrist prime minister type, Labour leader, understands that the Labour, whatever the difficulties, that the Labour Party will always be a coalition. And, you need to know that if you're going to be a Labour Prime Minister, because you're going, even if you have a big majority, big majorities can get quite small. Yeah. If there are a lot of if you push people, and I think that what is happening here is, it's a little bit too soon to say this is the rebirth of the left, and indeed did they ever really go away? But as a sort of an episode in party management and frankly right and wrong, it's been a bloody disaster. I think.
There's a word for what you've just described, that kind of pragmatic thinking. It's called politics.
Yes.
And this has been a real low spot of Keir Starmer's demonstrable politics.
And the heart does sink a bit, because week after week we've talked about how terrible Rishi Sunak is at politics. And in parenthesis, it's worth noting that since we last discussed the campaign, he's put in a good shift, Rishi. National service, calling Starmer Sleepy Keir.
I missed that, did he?
Yeah, no. They've been trying.
I've been fell walking in the Lake District.
Very wise. So. You haven't missed much. He's there trying to steal Sleepy Joe from Trump, obviously. But it doesn't work.
And call himself the Rishi.
And actually, the thing he did, which I think was really foolish, was one of the reasons that Boris Johnson won such a big victory in 2019 was that the Brexit party stood down.
Yeah.
And Farage had said something in The Sun which indicated he was open for a similar deal with Reform.
Yeah.
And, we know that Reform is eating into the Tory vote and could lose them seats. So I'm not saying that Sunak should have publicly said it's on. But he noisily said, I don't need reform. Now, that yet again, that he is still the laureate of rubbish politicians.
That's right. No. I mean, Keir Starmer is... there is the perennial lucky general theory. And there's... No matter how bad he might have faux par'd over this, you can count on Sunak doubling down.
Yes, but it won't always be Sunak.
It won't well, at some point it'll be him in the chair.
That's right. And this is, at minimum, this is a serious warning to him about not taking anything and anyone for granted.
Yeah.
It's not just about... one thing that does occur to me is that, for understandable reasons, his team have been focused like a laser on the red wall and winning back those seats. And that's understandable. And they need the red wall seats. They need Scotland. But they also need, ethnic minority voters groups who have traditionally voted for Labour. And this will have sent, as you said, Matt, a terrible signal.
That's right.
And so I hope it's early enough in the campaign for him to have learnt the lesson. But I don't think we're impressed, are we?
Well, not very impressed at all. And it may get worse before it gets better because, of course, a decision has to be made very soon.
You know what the smart thing to do would be? Keep her as candidate.
Totally, yeah.
Totally. Look, what do you got to lose?
Even if you ended up saying, look, I know people don't believe me, and I know I sit on the NEC committee and people think that I'm stirring this, but I have let the process develop and the process has concluded.
Yes.
And Diane Abbott is...
Welcome back.
Welcome, Diane Abbott.
Candidate.
And by the way...
And we hope for many more elections.
And we're currently ordering the plinth for your statue.
What has all this confusion been about?
All right, well, listen, enough of politics for the time being. We're going to talk about showbiz politics in part 2.
Very excited.
With a fabulous guest, an absolutely fantastic guest. Alan Edwards.
A legend.
Has seen it all.
He really has seen it all, actually.
And has written a fantastic book about... how many years? 40 years in showbiz?
Yeah, his life representing, literally some of the greatest acts in the history of pop music.
Do you know the best thing about Alan Edwards?
Tell me.
He's been a new European subscriber from day one. What more can you say?
We could almost... we'd just do laps now.
Yeah, but that's not why he's on.
That's not what he said.
He's on to tell us all about Bowie and Blondie and the Stones and Prince. You're going to love it. You're in for a treat. Join us in a few seconds.